Hey everyone! Before we dive into today's story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any of our car history deep dives. And if you'd like to support the channel financially, all the necessary details are in the video description. Every bit of support helps this channel grow. Now, buckle up. Today, we're diving into the story of Monteverdi, one of the most fascinating names in automotive history. Switzerland is a country of crystal clear lakes, alpine meadows, beautiful mountain ranges, and an incredibly high standard of living. Everyone knows, or at least has heard of, the precise Swiss watches, the delicious Swiss chocolate, and the famous Swiss Army knives, which the company Victorinox began producing back in the late 19th century. However, not everyone knows about the existence of the Swiss automobile industry, since the companies that belong to it could almost be counted on the fingers of one hand, and almost all of them are barely known outside the country, except for one. This company is perhaps the most famous Swiss car manufacturer. It was founded in 1967 and worked for almost 20 years engaged in small-scale production of luxurious, expensive, and mostly very powerful cars. This company is called Monteverdi, and this video is dedicated to its history. It is no secret that one of the most important trends in the development of European car manufacturing in the second half of the 20th century was the attempt to combine European stylistic aesthetics with the American power of 8-cylinder engines. Such well-known companies as the French Fissore, the British Jensen, and the Italian De Tomaso worked in this direction. The Swiss company Monteverdi was engaged in almost the same thing, producing ultra-luxurious, high-powered cars with characteristic European design on the outside and equally characteristic American muscle on the inside. Its founder was Peter Monteverdi, whose father owned a serious business in repairing and selling trucks and passenger cars in a small Swiss town called Binningen. Peter had been accustomed to dealing with cars from a very early age, and by the age of 16, in 1950, he began building his first automobile. This car was completed 2 years later and was named the Monteverdi Special. It had a completely unique body, while the chassis, significantly modified, and the 45-horsepower engine were borrowed from the 1949 Fiat 1100. It was with this, generally rather unprepossessing little car, that the adult career of Peter Monteverdi began, first as a racer and then as an automobile constructor. His racing career started with hill climbing, speed races up mountain roads, and then continued in numerous road racing championships held across Europe. At the same time, Peter inherited his father's business after his father passed away in 1956. Successfully combining racing with the car business, Peter Monteverdi soon began building racing cars in small numbers. Starting with simple and inexpensive karts, by the early 1960s he reached the production of Formula One cars, and a little later, after renaming his father's enterprise to Monteverdi Binningen Motors, or MBM, he tried his hand at creating civilian sports cars. However, the first attempt was a failure. Both models created by Monteverdi for the civilian market attracted no attention from potential buyers. Nevertheless, the young entrepreneur had plenty to do, even though in 1961 he left racing after a serious accident. After all, back in 1957, when he was only 23, he became the first and only official representative of Ferrari in Switzerland. In the first half of the 1960s, Monteverdi's dealerships began selling other prestigious European cars as well, such as BMW, Lancia, and Bentley. Then, in early 1964, Monteverdi started importing the latest British four-seater GT Jensen CV8, equipped with mighty Chrysler Golden Commando V8 engines. Monteverdi himself used one of them as his personal car. It was precisely this model that returned him to the idea of creating his own automobile.
but this time not a sports car, rather a luxury one, with a powerful American engine and exquisite European design.
Monteverdi became even more determined to create such a car after he literally quarreled with Enzo Ferrari, because Ferrari demanded full prepayment for an order of 100 cars. Completely cutting ties with Ferrari in 1965, Peter set about practically implementing his idea. He intended to design and put into production a car that would be as fast as the Italian stallions, but far more luxurious and comfortable. Moreover, Monteverdi wanted to establish such production at home in Switzerland, since the last local car manufacturer, Martini, had left the business back in 1934. The Swiss had practically forgotten that they once had their own national automaker. Having started work on the project in 1965, he managed to bring it to life by the autumn of 1967. In October, at the Frankfurt Motor Show, the two-seater GT Monteverdi High-Speed 375S was presented, which was originally intended to be promoted under the MBM brand. But eventually, a far more fitting and melodic, truly European name was chosen: Monteverdi. In essence, this car was a constructor, assembled from parts and components of other manufacturers. But it was a truly remarkable constructor. The tubular space frame, developed by Monteverdi himself, was built by a small Swiss firm. The rear Dédillon suspension and the front coilover suspension, as well as the brakes, came from Britain. The steering system came from Germany. The incredibly elegant two-door body was Italian, created by the Frua studio, and the engine and transmission were American. The 7.2-liter Chrysler V8 had 375 horsepower, which was reflected in the model name, and 651 Newton-meters of torque. It propelled the relatively compact car, just over 4.5 meters long and weighing just under 1,700 kilograms, from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in exactly 6 seconds, while the top speed was 250 kilometers per hour. Both figures were claimed by the manufacturer, and for European car making of the late 1960s, they were very impressive. Even the Jaguar E-Type and the Aston Martin DBS could not boast such performance. Despite the incredibly high price, which according to some sources exceeded $200,000 in today's equivalent, the 375S already attracted several wealthy buyers at the show. Orders were placed, and the market debut of the first Swiss car brand in decades had taken place. The founding year of Monteverdi is considered to be 1967. Immediately after the start of sales of this two-seater 375 version, Peter Monteverdi began thinking about a more spacious and practical four-seater modification, since from his own sales experience, he knew that four-seater models sold much better. To fit rear seats into the body, Frua's designers extended the wheelbase of the original model by 10 centimeters and presented the prototype 375L to the client. Monteverdi did not like it at all, because it hardly differed from the two-seater version and still used the fastback body type. Therefore, Monteverdi turned to another Italian coach builder, Fissore, whose specialists made certain changes to Frua's original design and turned the fastback into a semi-fastback with a noticeably separated trunk. There was another reason why Monteverdi rejected Frua's design. He was dissatisfied with the quality of Frua's bodies, since Frua often subcontracted work to smaller independent body shops, which affected the final quality. Meanwhile, Fissore closely monitored the quality of its production and allowed no such liberties. The high-speed 375L model, created by Fissore, received a 17-centimeter wheelbase extension and looked far more solid than the Frua version. The Monteverdi 375L Fissore went on sale in 1969 and remained in the Monteverdi catalog until 1977. That is, until the very end of the high-speed 375 series production. However, as with most Monteverdi models, no one knows the exact number of cars sold. Some sources say 300 units. Others claim no more than 50 were built. Another potential Monteverdi model was the stylish two-door 2000 GT, built on a BMW chassis in 1968 and using a Bavarian four-cylinder engine, producing 130 horsepower. According to legend, the idea and design of the only prototype Monteverdi 2000 GT were developed by Pietro Frua himself, head of Carrozzeria Frua, which at that time was working very closely with BMW. Frua conceived this model as a cheaper alternative to the high-speed 375S and hoped that Monteverdi would approve the idea, but this did not happen. Although the model was presented to the public at the Geneva Motor Show in March and received fairly positive reviews, Monteverdi wanted his cars to use only powerful American V8s and rejected the Italians' proposal to launch the 2000 GT into production. It was at this moment that cracks began to grow in the relationship between Frua and Monteverdi. Pietro Frua turned the Monteverdi 2000 GT prototype into a BMW 2000 Ti coupe prototype. And by placing BMW logos and a small double grille in BMW style, showed the model at the Paris Motor Show in autumn. And when, a few months later, Monteverdi rejected another Frua design for the four-seater version of the 375 model, relations between the companies and their bosses finally broke down. Frua sued Monteverdi, demanding a ban on the further use of his original design for the two-seater high-speed 375S, and eventually won the case. By that time, Monteverdi had already started working with Carrozzeria Fissore, and it was Fissore that he entrusted with the redesign of the two-seater 375S. The result, frankly, could not be called a beauty standard. But despite the fact that the updated 375S, when viewed from the front, resembled a frightened fish, and its rounded front forms conflicted with the square, angular rear design, this model still found its fans and remained on the market until 1972 as a coupe, and until 1974 as a convertible. Again, the exact number of cars sold is unknown. Sources vary from several dozen to just a few units. As soon as sales of the updated 375S started, Monteverdi immediately began working on the next project, a true mid-engined supercar, which debuted in 1970 at the Geneva Motor Show under the name High 450 SS. This model, whose design was developed by German stylist Trevor Fiore, who worked at Fissore, used almost the same architecture as the 375S, with a steel space frame, independent front suspension and rear dédian, a 5-speed ZF manual transmission, and Chrysler's most powerful engine, the 426 HEMI, equipped with two Carter 4-barrel carburetors. The engine, located between the seats, produced 450 horsepower and 664 Newton-meters of torque, and according to some data, could accelerate the car from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in 5.5 seconds, and further to a top speed of 290 kilometers per hour. The High 450 SS was also equipped with air conditioning, power windows, and even a heated rear window, and had a fairly good weight distribution, 54 to 46. At the time of its presentation, the Monteverdi High 450 SS Supercar was priced by the manufacturer at 90,000 Swiss francs, more than $100,000 in today's money. And despite such a sky-high price, several wealthy Europeans still wanted to buy this car. However, it turned out that Monteverdi never even intended to put the model into production, considering it too special to be owned by anyone but himself. For a year and a half, the insane supercar traveled to various exhibitions and was even repainted for each of them. And yet, at the very end of 1971, the Monteverdi 450 SS was finally sold to a Swiss businessman named Karl-Heinz Schubert. And that's where we'll pause for now. But don't go too far. Part 2 of this Monteverdi story is coming soon, and you won't want to miss how it all unfolds. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, so you'll be the first to catch the next chapter in this incredible automotive tale.